Visual language, meanings, photographers' jargons. Hello and welcome to today's episode on visual language, meanings, photographers' jargons. The content for this episode has been researched by Sunil Saxena, who is an author and journalist with over 3 decades of experience in print, new media, social media, media education, and media research. In this episode, you will learn about the terms that are part of a photographer's manual. You will get to know about the 3 most important terms in a photographer's vocabulary and what do they stand for. You will get an understanding of the language of photography, especially how photographers compose images and the terms they use to describe the different forms of light. You will also learn about the photographer's jargon or words that they use to describe different situations that they encounter while shooting. Photography, ever since its evolution, has developed a language of its own. It is a language that photographers use to communicate with each other, with their editors, and their clients. The language is technology dependent, and most of the words are derived from the equipment used by photographers. The term photography is derived from 2 Greek words, phos, which means light, and graphe, which means to draw. This is why photography is defined as the art of drawing with light. The photographers do use a variation of this definition to explain their work. They define themselves as professionals who communicate with light. Well-known photographer Huntington Witherill says, "Photography is in most every sense of the word a language. It is a language of light and a language of visual expression." He considers the photographic language as the most adept form of efficient and precise communication devised by man. He is right. The photographers need to master the visual language if they have to be rated high. They have to learn new techniques which are akin to adding new words to their visual vocabulary. They also have to learn to use these techniques. Otherwise, their language may be like that of an individual who has a vast vocabulary but is unable to express himself properly. The language of photography is made of 2 aspects. The first is the form or the mechanics. The second is that of visual appeal or aesthetics. Basics or mechanics of photography. This is the first language that every photographer has to learn. It can be called the terminology or glossary of photography. Important camera manufacturers include it in their manuals, while photo instructors start their lessons with these terms. Let's understand the meaning of the most important words that populate the language of photographers. The 3 words are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. The aperture is the variable opening in the camera lens through which light travels to the digital sensor. The larger the opening, the greater is the amount of light that enters the camera, and vice versa. The size of aperture opening is defined in f numbers, popularly known as f-stops. Logically, a small f-stop should mean a small opening, and a large f-stop should mean a larger aperture. But this is not so in photography. A small f-stop means a large aperture or large opening, while a large f-stop indicates small opening. So, when a photographer wants very little light to enter the camera, he sets the f-stop setting at f/8. But when he needs a large volume of light, he changes the setting to f/1.4. The f-stop is also used to define lens speed. A lens with a low f-stop is considered a fast lens because it can allow more light to enter than a lens with a high f-stop. Professional photographers therefore check the maximum and minimum on f-stops before buying a camera. Another term that flows from aperture is depth of field, which can be described as the distance between the nearest and farthest objects that appear in focus in the image. The depth of field is a very important part of the photographer's vocabulary because it explains the sharp and blurred parts of an image. A photographer can focus on a petal and make it stand out, making the rest of the flower look hazy. This is an example of a narrow depth of field. The photographer can capture a long line of hills stretching up to the horizon where all objects are sharp. This is an example of a large depth of field. The depth of field is dependent upon the aperture and the focal length of the lens. The second important word is the ISO number, where ISO is the acronym of International Standards Organization. The ISO number defines the sensitivity of sensors to available light. A camera with a higher ISO number is more sensitive to light as compared to a camera with a lower ISO number. In the non-digital cameras, the films were categorized on the basis of ISO number, and the photographer knew which ISO film to use. In today's digital cameras, the component that decides the sensitivity is image sensor, also called digital sensor or simply sensor. This is one of the most expensive parts in a camera. It converts the light that falls on it into electrical signals to create an image. The higher ISO number cameras can capture images even in dim light without a flash. This is not so in the case of cameras with low ISO numbers. Each camera has a base ISO, which is the lowest sensitivity number of the sensor installed in the camera. Generally, the base ISO is either 100 or 200. It is programmed to produce the sharpest image in normal light conditions. The ISO numbers grow in geometric progression. So the ISO series reads as 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, and so on. Each ISO number doubles the sensitivity of the sensor. Thus, an ISO 1600 is 16 times more sensitive than ISO 100 and can capture an image in 16 times less light than a camera with ISO 100 sensor. The third important word in photography is shutter speed. The shutter is used to regulate the quantum of light that falls on the sensor. The shutter speed is also called exposure time and is used to create effects that range from freezing motion or creating blurs. The shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second. When the shutter speed of a camera is set at 1 by 4, it means that the shutter will let the light to pass onto the sensor for a quarter of a second. If, however, the shutter speed is 1 on 250, it means that the light will pass for only 1 by 250th part of a second. Another important term in the photographer's vocabulary is exposure. It can be defined as the amount of light that falls or is recorded on the sensor. Too much light will make the film overly bright, while too little light will turn the image dark, especially if the ISO value of the sensor is low. This is why the photographer needs to balance three things: shutter speed, ISO number, and aperture. Today, the amateurs work with point and shoot cameras, also known as P&S cameras, while the advanced or professional photographers use digital single lens reflex cameras, popularly known as DSLRs. The key difference between them is the way the photographer sees the scene. In the point and shoot cameras, the photographer, when he looks through the viewfinder, can see what he is shooting, but he cannot see the real image being formed by the lens. As against this, in the digital single lens reflex camera, the image that the photographer sees through the viewfinder is the same image that is being formed on the sensor. Clearly, DSLRs are far superior to point and shoot cameras. The DSLRs have one more advantage. The photographer can change lenses according to needs. This is not so in the case of point and shoot cameras, where the lens is fixed. The most commonly used lens in cameras is a 50 mm lens, which is also known as normal lens. It is closest to what the eye can see. For specialized photography, the photographers use three kinds of lenses. The first is the zoom lens, which is a lens with variable focal length. The focal length can range from 24 to 70 mm or from 18 to 55 mm. The photographer can change the focal length to make the image sharper by rotating the barrel of the lens. The second is telephoto lens. The focal length of a telephoto lens ranges from 70 to 300 mm. It enables the photographer to take photographs of objects that are at a distance. It narrows the field of view and magnifies the object. The telephoto lens is much longer than the normal lens and has to be screwed separately. The third lens that is part of every professional photographer's kit is the wide-angle lens. This lens gives the photographer a wide field of view than a normal lens and is very suitable for taking pictures of large groups. Three new terms that have crept into every photographer's terminology in the digital era are resolution, megapixels, and file format. Resolution can be defined as the amount of detail that a camera can capture, and it is measured in pixels. A camera that can capture 1 million pixels is said to have a resolution of 1 megapixel. It can produce an image whose size is roughly 1200 pixels by 900 pixels. News and advertising photographers who need to produce high-quality images use cameras whose resolution can be 11 megapixels or even more. Most DSLRs give the option to photographers to shoot images in the JPG format. This has become a popular image format, though some photographers refer to shoot in the RAW format. The RAW format is a much larger file and carries more information. The photographer can process this file manually using photo software. We should also not forget focus. It is a function of the camera, lens, and aperture setting, and an important element of the visual language. Images that are in focus are sharp and crisp, while those that are out of focus are hazy and blurred. The language of light. The language of photography is full of light terms because the photographers work with light. When the photographers refer to ambient light, they mean available light where no additional light source is used. Hard light to them is bright sunlight or light produced by the camera's flash. Such light produces strong shadows with well-defined edges. It is used mostly to produce contrast, to highlight texture, lines, or wrinkles. Soft light is the reverse. It is diffused light, such as light on an overcast day, which produces soft shadows and low contrast. It is good for wedding or fashion photography as it adds charm to subjects. The photographers are also concerned about the lighting pattern, that is, the way light falls on the face of the subject. They work hard to ensure that the lighting pattern highlights contrast or brings out sharp edges. They use reflectors to throw more light on a subject, or go in for subtractive lighting by using opaque objects on top of the subject's head to block light. The idea is to create deeper shadows and higher contrast. All cameras come with a built-in flash or have a hot shoe where a flash can be mounted. However, the flash can be a double-edged tool. It can provide extra light in dimly lit areas, but it can also lead to blown-out photographs because of excessive lighting. The photographers use several techniques to make the right use of flash. These include bouncing light off a reflective surface, using a remote flash, or using the flash in the middle of a long exposure. However, it takes much practice and working in different light situations to master these tricks. Visual rules. Composing the photograph. Over the years, photographers have come up with several composition guidelines that have become an important part of the visual language. The most important composition guidelines or techniques are: 1. The rule of thirds. This composition technique helps the photographer decide where to place the subject in the frame. Some camera makers even provide a tic-tac-toe grid in the viewfinder to help the photographers. The grid divides the frame into 9 segments using 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines. The photographer is advised to place the subject at the points where the lines intersect or next to them. This creates a balanced and pleasing creation. 2. Leading lines. When photographing subjects like a hillside, the photograph can be composed in such a manner that the eyes of the viewer are guided by strong lines created by a curving road or lines created by pine trees. The lines can guide the viewer to the central point of the photograph. 3. Symmetry and patterns. Natural or man-made patterns arrest eye movement and make interesting photographs. The patterns can be caused by shadows, colors, design, texture, or shape. They can be symmetrical or asymmetrical, but each pattern is a natural composition technique. The photographers use them to create stunning photographs. 4. Framing. The subject is shot through a frame, which may be an arc, a door, an opening, etc. The resultant effect is focus created by the object through which the subject has been framed. 5. Scale and proportion. This technique is a great way to underline size. For instance, a tall volleyball player may be photographed standing against an open car door to underline the height of the player. When done properly, the effect of this technique can be stunning. 6. Give space on the side. This composition rule advises photographers to leave space on the side of the frame, especially if the photograph is of a moving object. The viewer gets a feel of action. 7. Movement along the diagonal. This composition technique is favored by news photographers. They shoot the subject, especially sports events, along the diagonal to give the image a sense of movement. Photographers' jargon. There are several words that do not appear in any manual for photographers, but they are an important part of their vocabulary. Some of these words that can be called photographers' jargon are: 1. Fast glass. A lens with a very large maximum aperture is referred to as fast glass because it increases shutter speed and allows photographers to take images quickly. 2. Chimping. This has become a very popular term after the arrival of digital cameras. It means looking at each image after shooting it. This action is not only performed by professional photographers, but also by amateurs who want to see how each image looks. 3. Shutter lag. This is referred to the time lag that occurs between the pressing of the shutter button and its actual opening. It is quite noticeable in point-and-shoot cameras, but much less in DSLRs. The photographers are careful about shutter lag because the image will get affected if their hand shakes during this period or the focus shifts. 4. Camera shake. Today, the DSLRs are heavy and there's a possibility of slight shaking of hand while shooting. The shifting or shaking, which is referred to as camera shake, can cause a blurring of the image. No photographer wants this to happen. 5. Lens flare. When a high-intensity light source shines directly on the lens, the image can turn hazy. Sometimes it may also create circles of bright light. Photographers refer to this happening as lens flare. 6. Panning. Panning is a term used by photographers to refer to shooting a moving object at a slow shutter speed. The photographer moves the camera in the same direction as the subject, creating a blurred background and giving a sense of motion. 7. Photog. It is a short term for photographers. 8. Glass. It is a term used for lens. 9. Golden hour. The hour right after sunrise or right before sunset is called the golden hour or magic hour. At this time, the sun is low in the horizon and the light is soft. 10. Spray and pray. Action photographers use this slang when they take shots of fast-paced events like riots. They shoot as many images as possible, hoping to catch one or two that may be unique. 11. Selfie. This is a term that has become highly popular after the arrival of mobile cameras that allow users to shoot their own photographs and post them on the net. 12. Wide open. It is a term that is used for taking a picture where the aperture is at its maximum or widest setting. Let's do a quick summary of what you have learned today. Photographers who work with light have evolved their own language. This language is populated with words that the photographers use in their day-to-day work. This language can be found in photography manuals and also learned in photography classes. However, the best photographers are those who are able to use this language to capture captivating moments. The three most important words in the vocabulary of photographers are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO number. These decide the amount of light that will go into making an image and how well that image will form on the digital sensor. Here, the role of lenses cannot be ignored. There's a much bigger world in photography beyond the 50 mm or normal lens. The photographers need to master the language of wide-angle lens, telephoto lens, and zoom lens if they have to deliver striking results. Another important component of a photographer's skills is composition. The photographers over the years have developed techniques that help in picture composition. These include composition techniques like the rule of thirds, framing, scale and proportion, symmetry and balance, movement along the diagonal, etc. The photographers have also learned how to use light to produce magical effects. They have classified light as ambient light, hard light, soft light, etc., and learnt what settings should be used in these light situations. They have even developed their own jargon like golden hour or magic hour to describe light conditions. This is all that we have in today's episode. We hope it would have given you an insight into the world of photography and photographers. Thank you and see you soon with another informative episode. Goodbye.